Okay, Roro. Who made you?
God.
Very good. And what else did God make?
Heavens.
And?
The earth.
Good. And that's everything, right?
Yeah.
Why did God make everything?
For his glory.
Very good.
2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth.
Man, that intro music is good. Now I feel kind of hyped up and ready to go. Welcome to the PodCatechist. This is episode 2. Thank you so much for joining me. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice that we added video to the production. So enjoy that if you really desire to know what I looked like while I was saying all of this. Here I am. And so all of that said, welcome to the PodCatechist, episode 2. Today, I want to talk about the myth of neutrality to get started. Okay, the myth of neutrality. Years ago, I had a coworker who told me that she had decided to, instead of, choosing a religion for her children and then teaching them that religion and forcing that religion on them, that she was going to teach them about all religions and kind of let them decide for themselves what they believe. So she, decorated her whole house with statues and pictures from every religion known to man. In her mind, what she was doing, I think, was creating kind of a religious neutral space where her kids could kind of see the landscape of belief that exists in the world and make an informed decision for herself, or for themselves, rather, of what they were going to believe. They would have like a well-educated, wide range of, experience with religion and kind of come to their own conclusion. I think that that's what she thought she was doing. That's what she told herself she was doing, at least. It was creating this neutral space, in theory. But was that what she was actually doing in reality? What she actually was doing was teaching her kids that all of these religions are okay. All of them are fine. You can choose any of them, and that's your choice. All of them are a perfectly valid choice. No big deal. What is that? That's not a neutral space. That is just classic polytheism. One of the oldest and most common types of religion, false religion, mind you, of all time. It's been around for literally millennia. There's all sorts of polytheistic religions that teach exactly that. In fact, they would be happy to add Jesus to the list, for example, as long as it meant all the other gods could stay too. As long as there's tolerance for other gods, Jesus can stay. The Romans said that. The Hindus say that even today. They have gods numbering in the millions, a god of and for anything and everything. And the stumbling block for them would be when you tell them that all of these gods are fake at best or actually demonic and harmful at worst, and there's actually only one true living God. There's only one, and he is intolerant of any other idol. So again, back to the point here, my friend, I think she thought she was creating a neutral space. So she wanted to avoid imposing religion on her children, but ended up imposing a religion on them anyway. Because neutrality doesn't actually exist. It's a myth. In other words, it's not whether you are going to teach your children a religion. It's which religion are you going to teach them? And are you going to teach it to them on purpose? Right? And yes, even secular, humanistic atheism, that is as much a religion as anything, with its own texts, its own tenets, its own punishments for blasphemy against the God of science, right? And the works, the whole deal. It's as much a religion as anything else. So I use this story of my former coworker as an example, but the myth of neutrality, it really does show up everywhere in our society. It shows up most prominently when we are told that there can exist these kind of secular neutral spaces whether they be in politics or in education or in science. We've been lied to and told that we can have these kind of neutral spaces that are religionless, right? That respect all religions and don't impose any one religion on anybody. And we ought to work to maintain that neutral space, we're told, so that we can all kind of get along and meet our common goals, no matter whose God you serve. So on the surface, that sounds pretty good. It sounds pretty ecumenical. It sounds like we can get a lot done. It sounds pretty inclusive. So we've got the pretense of neutrality there. We want the common good. So even a lot of Christians have bought into this, and they believe in it a lot of times more than anybody for whatever reason, but ultimately it's a lie. It's not real. Neutrality is not real. When we say you're allowed to keep your gods, you just can't bring them into this space. And in this space, your gods or God can't tell me what to do. What you've actually done is make yourself the God of that space, right? You haven't created a neutral, godless space. You've just made yourself the God of that space, right? So let's say I'm in charge of a school. That's one of the spaces where this happens. If I'm in charge of a school and I say, I want this educational space to be religiously neutral, all religions are okay, but none of them are allowed to have any say in what we do at my school. What that does, in effect, is make me the God of that school. As long as you're in my school, your God and your gods are beneath me. They submit to me. Your God can't tell me what to do in my space because I here am God, right? So again, in an attempt to create a religiously neutral space, what I've actually done is create a new religion that exists only in this space with myself as the supreme being. And there are countless school boards, governments, you name it, who have aspired to this very thing. They did away with religion, dethroned God in their minds, and the first thing they saw when they did that was a job opening. And so that leaves us with this little phrase that folks have used for years, which is, it's not whether but which. It's not whether but which. So it's not whether we are going to worship, it's which God are we going to worship, right? Or, as sung the great Bob Dylan, God bless him, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. So neutrality, it does not exist. We know it doesn't exist, one, because it just logically can't. So for instance, you might say, well, what about Switzerland during, World War II, refusing to enter the war and take a side? Is that not the absolute stereotype of neutrality? But what we fail to recognize is that Switzerland not entering the war benefited one of the sides in the war, right? And we can argue about which side that is, but again, by not entering the war, someone benefited. Someone. So sure, Switzerland's decision to stay out of the war appears neutral on the surface, but logically it's not neutral at all. It's still a decision that benefited somebody. So we know neutrality doesn't exist because, one, it logically can't, but we also know it doesn't exist because, two, that's the way God designed reality. As Christians, we have to believe that. Listen to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19 here. God says to Israel, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. Right? So the choice is not life, death, and then some kind of third way option that is kind of, neutrally straddling the line between life and death, right? No, there's only two roads. The wide one that leads to destruction, and the narrow one that leads to eternal life. That's it. There's no neutrality here. Jesus also says in Luke chapter 11, verse 23, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. So again, Jesus leaves no room for neutrality here. You might be listening to this as someone who would say, I don't have any strong opinions about Jesus. I'm not really for him. I'm not really against him either. If that's you, Jesus says, you're against me. You may think you're neutral and doing no harm, but in reality, if you're not gathering, you're scattering. If you're not with Christ, you're against him. One more passage, Jesus speaks to the Laodicean church in Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. He says, I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. I'd rather you be either cold or hot. Honestly, I'd rather you just pick a side. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. You're worse than cold. You're worse than the worst option. You're lukewarm. I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. That's disgusting to me. That's not new. You might think you have the pretense of neutrality. Actually, God despises that. Neutrality, not real. And actually, it's an anti-Christian idea. Now, just to kind of tie a bow on this, why bring all this up, right? Why am I talking about the myth of neutrality? Well, there's a lot of applications, I think, to the discourse that's going on publicly and religiously, politically even right now. But the reason why I'm bringing it up specifically is because in the first episode that I did, where I talked about following your heart, I talked about what a catechism is and that I'm even catechizing my own children. One question that always comes up when I talk about this just with like friends, kind of as I'm going, one question that always comes up is, well, aren't you indoctrinating your kids? Right? Isn't that bad? Isn't it bad to like indoctrinate your kids? Aren't we like against that? Even Christians will say that. Good, godly Christian people will be like, are you sure you're allowed to do this? Like, that seems a little much. Like, that seems like we're not, are we allowed to indoctrinate children? We've been taught that that's a bad thing. And I don't disparage anybody when they ask that question, because it is a good question if you've been brought up in this culture, which teaches that it's possible to not really indoctrinate kids. Like, we want them to go to school and learn facts, learn science, and we're not going to indoctrinate them. That's not real. Okay? That's why I bring this up, is that this idea that you could possibly have an unindoctrinated kid is not real. The problem with that line of questioning, rather, is that it assumes a world where it's possible for kids to grow up indoctrination free, right? But it's not whether your kids will be indoctrinated, it's which indoctrination they will get. There is no neutrality. Everyone lives by a certain set of doctrines. Hopefully I've made that clear by now, that everyone has a worldview, everyone has doctrines that they live by, and they may not even know it, but if you really sit down and ask them questions about what they believe, the answer that bubbles up is going to be the doctrine that they live by most of the time, or at least aspire to live by. All of us have doctrines that, like, are ideals in our mind, but we may fall short of them all the time. Everyone has that, but we all have a doctrine. Even if we're not Christian, we have a worldview, we have a catechism, we have a doctrine that we live by. That means that my children are eventually going to receive the doctrines that they live by from somewhere, right? They are going to get their worldview from someone. They are going to be catechized by someone. They are going to develop assumptions about the way the world works and then live by those assumptions. The question is, where will those assumptions come from, and will those assumptions be Christian? Because it's not whether you've been catechized, it's which catechism you were taught. So am I indoctrinating my kids? Absolutely. Unashamedly, I am indoctrinating my children. Why? Well, one, because the Bible commands me as a father to do that. In Ephesians 6, it says, fathers, raise up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Okay? So as a dad, as a Christian, I need to be obedient to God here and do that and raise my children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord as best as I possibly know how and can, right? God expects me to catechize my kids. It's my job. It's my marching orders as a father. So by grace, I'm going to do it. But also, kids getting indoctrinated is an inescapable concept, right? That's another term that is related to the myth of neutrality, that some things are inescapable concepts. They are always present. There is always a highest power in a particular hierarchy structure, for example. Okay? So if I don't indoctrinate my kids, somebody else inevitably will. If I don't catechize my kids, someone else will. Or, actually, from another point of view, if I don't indoctrinate my kids on purpose, I will indoctrinate them on accident. They're going to pick up beliefs, actions, and habits from me that I don't even intend on them to carry on. I would rather them actually not do that. Little kids, they're like mirrors, man. They see you do something one time, and it's something that you never want them to do, but you did it, and they saw it, and now they're doing it, man. And that is what it's like to raise children. They are always showing you where you need to grow, actually, because they mirror back to you your own actions. This happened this week. One of the things that happens with me is that I'm a very disorganized person. I have a lot of clutter, and I'm trying to get better at that, but it happens all the time. And part of the reason why it happens is because I will mindlessly set something down somewhere and walk away to go do something else, and then forget where I put it. And so there are nights sometimes where I'm looking for something before I go to bed, and I'm searching around the house for like 20 minutes trying to find this thing. Where did I put it? Whether it's a book or my water bottle or something. I can't find it anywhere. And usually my wife notices that I'm anxiously just ripping the house apart looking for this thing. And she'll be like, "What are you looking for?" And I'll be like, "I'm looking for my water bottle." And she'll say, "It's in your daughter's room on her dresser." Like she knows where it is because she's paying attention to life and things. And I'm always thinking about something. But I digress. The moral of the story is that earlier this week, my daughter Sparrow found, this little like heart-shaped sticker, I guess, and it ended up going in the toy box. Well, 2 days later, I come in there and she has ripped everything out of the toy box. It's just scattered all over the place, and she's digging through everything anxiously. I'm like, "What are you doing, buddy?" And I asked my wife, and she'd been in there doing this for 20 minutes. She's digging through everything, looking for this stupid little heart sticker. She just can't find it. She's so anxious about it. And I'm sitting there thinking, so that's what it's like. That's what it's like, seeing my daughter just mirror all of my actions, right? What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that if you don't indoctrinate your kids on purpose, you're at least going to indoctrinate them on accident. So you better at least try to indoctrinate your kids on purpose. All that to say, don't believe the lie. Don't believe the myth of neutrality. When people try to tell you that there ought to be these religiously neutral zones, whether they be in schools or governments or your home, what have you, don't buy it. Neutrality, it's a myth. All right, section 2, I want to continue talking about catechism, the actual Christian tradition practice of catechism. I want to get into the nitty-gritty of that and look at an historic Christian catechism that has been helpful to the people of God for centuries now. But in recent generations, the work of catechism has been mostly neglected. It works best, especially with children, if it's done in the home and led by the father of the home. And so a lot of times you'll talk to folks who grew up in a more kind of liturgical faith, which let's think like Lutheran or Presbyterian or something, and they didn't do catechism at home, but they did do catechism classes when they were teenagers, and they hated it. And so there's that. But I also think that there's plenty of other reasons why catechisms have just kind of fallen out of favor amongst Christians, especially in the West. And it's my hope to kind of bring the practice back. I don't really care which catechism you use as long as it doesn't contain heresy, and I don't really care how you go about pulling it off, as long as you pull it off. Like, it can be really helpful, really useful, just as a tool for learning what we believe as Christians. So that said, there's several great historic Christian catechisms that we could look at on the podcast, and Lord willing, eventually we will. So you've got, for example, I encourage you to look these up in your own time. So for example, you've got the Heidelberg, brilliant catechism, super helpful, really fun. There is both the Westminster shorter and longer catechism, two different things, shorter and longer. I'll let you figure out what the difference is. Anyway, there's also several Baptist catechisms. I'm a Baptist, don't want to leave any Baptists out here. And so several Baptist catechisms that we could look at. And if the Lord wills it, I think hopefully we'll get to go through all of these, if this podcast goes on long enough to pull that off. But I want to start with what's called a Puritan Catechism. A Puritan Catechism. This is a catechism that was put together by the great Charles Haddon Spurgeon. CH Spurgeon. Spurgeon is likely a name you've heard before. I'm not going to patronize you, but a little bit of information just in case. He's been called the Prince of Preachers, easily one of the greatest preachers of all time. He was born in 1834, died in 1892. So he's a 19th century preacher and theologian, founded his own seminary. He was a Baptist preacher, pastored one of the largest congregations in London at the time. He was also a controversial figure in his day, largely disliked at the time. But, if you know your Bible, you know that's kind of the way of things. The great men of God are rarely liked by their own generation, but are honored and praised in future generations, mostly because they're dead and cause less trouble now that they're dead. This was true of the prophets, and Jesus roasted the Pharisees for it, right? Because they hated the prophets that God had sent to them in their own generation. They hated John the Baptist. They hated Jesus. The only reason they liked the old prophets, again, is because those prophets were dead and couldn't call them out in their sin and hypocrisy. Those prophets are safe because they only called out the sin of those guys. I've often said that if Spurgeon were alive today, most of Christendom would have him blocked on Twitter, but I digress. Spurgeon, great man of God, powerful preacher, very knowledgeable in the word and in church history, and he was bold in his proclamation of the truth. That's Spurgeon for you. You can't see it, but I have several Spurgeon things hanging up on my walls and several Spurgeon books behind me. A lot of people like him. I'm one of those people, unashamedly. All that to say, in October of 1855, Spurgeon was 21 years old. He had been pastor of New Park Street Chapel in London for about a year and a half. And he preaches a sermon on Psalm chapter 90, verse 1, which says, "Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations." One of the common practices, and Spurgeon practiced this, was he would publish his sermon notes and transcripts as just publicly. And so, they'd be published in various ways, but even if you didn't go to church at New Park Street Chapel, you could read, whatever Spurgeon had preached that particular Sunday. So when this sermon is published, he published alongside it what he called a Puritan Catechism. He borrowed a lot from the Westminster, especially the Westminster Shorter Catechism, which is Presbyterian, and of course Spurgeon was a Baptist, so he, is making revisions there. And he combined that with some Baptist catechism questions as well. And he essentially kind of custom made a catechism that was for his church. That's the whole reason why he made it. It was for his church. If you read through it, it's actually fantastic. It's really, really great stuff, really helpful to memorize. So when he published it, he included a little introduction to the catechism that I'll read you real quick. So Spurgeon wrote, "I am persuaded that the use of a good catechism in all our families will be a great safeguard against the increasing errors of the times. And therefore, I have compiled this little manual from the Westminster Assemblies and Baptist Catechisms for the use of my own church and congregation. Those who use it in their families or classes must labor to explain the sense, but the words should be carefully learned by heart, for they will be understood better as years pass. May the Lord bless my dear friends and their families evermore, is the prayer of their loving pastor, CH Spurgeon. Beautiful. So there's 82 questions in Spurgeon's A Puritan Catechism, and what I want to do is go through each question together in each episode of the podcast. We're going to do exactly what Spurgeon said, in other words, is we're going to look at the question, look at the answer. We're going to look at the verses that he cites with those questions and answers and see if, it holds up to the test of the scriptures that Spurgeon claims he's getting these from. And in that work, we will do what he says and explain the sense of what he's getting at in this teaching, in this catechism. By the way, that's that whole scripture citation thing, that's pretty common for catechisms. They're pulling the answers from scripture, and they're even going to tell you what scriptures they pulled the answers from so that you can go look for yourself and see if they're rightly interpreting those verses. And so really, really fantastic. So next episode, we'll look at question 1, answer 1, which Spurgeon, again, you've already heard this, but I'll give it to you again. Spurgeon borrows this directly from the Westminster Shorter Catechism, and he opens up a Puritan Catechism with question 1, what is the chief end of man? The answer, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. All right, part 3, and this is how we'll wrap up here. This is the end. We'll close by talking about a book. And the book that I want to recommend to you today is this Creeds, Confessions, and Catechisms, put together, edited by Chad Van Dixhoorn. Okay, so this podcast revolves obviously a lot around the concept and practice of catechism. Hopefully by now you've figured that out. But usually folks who talk about catechisms are also interested in things like creeds and confessions. Often, creeds, confessions, and catechisms are thought of as kind of like a package deal. So for those who are unfamiliar, I'll give a brief explanation. If you're anything like me, when you're on vacation, you might be looking for a church to go to while you're there. So you Google churches in that town, you click on their website, and what you'll find is that most churches have a page on their website dedicated to telling you what they believe. What you're looking for, what you hope to see on their website is that they affirm all of the doctrines that are necessary if you're going to call yourself a Christian church, right? So think, they believe in God, that God created everything. They believe in one God revealed in 3 persons. They believe that Jesus is fully God and fully man, and that Jesus was crucified, dead, buried, and rose again bodily on the 3rd day. They believe that the Bible is our authority. These are all first importance issues. Highest importance, first importance. You can't compromise on these things and call yourself a Christian, at least not a Christian in the way that the apostles or Jesus would have thought of it. So that's the first importance stuff. God, Trinity, salvation, Bible, all that. But then, if again, we're looking at the website here, the church after that or somewhere else is going to let you know where they stand on certain secondary and tertiary issues, things that are of second and third importance, okay? So that you kind of know what you're getting into, really, is the point. Okay, I get it. You're not a cult, you're not teaching heresy. You're not so liberal that your brain is falling out of your ears. But what kind of church are you? Like, what do you do? Like, do you sing modern songs or do you sing hymns? Do you baptize babies or do you not baptize babies? Like, what are we looking at here? What do you believe that are issues that you and I might disagree on, but we're still Christians. We can still agree on the first importance stuff. We're both Christians, but these are secondary issues that we as Christians have liberty in the scriptures to disagree on. Creeds and confessions are a lot like that, except they're historic. They go back a really long time, and that means that they're time tested. And that's one of the things that I really like about them, is that they're time tested. Creeds are going to be first importance stuff, right? First importance stuff. Confessions are way longer and get into the nitty-gritty of theology, including those secondary issues that you might disagree with, like I said, mode of baptism, for example, okay? So all that to say, what Chad Van Dixhoorn does with this little volume here, and it is beautiful. This is it's a reader's edition. I'm not aware of any other way that it actually comes, and you'll see mine's got stains. It's kind of beat up a little bit. I use it frequently, more than just reading it once. I go back to it regularly. So what he does in this little volume is he puts together just an incredible compilation of the historic creeds, confessions, and catechisms that have been passed down through the centuries. But before each of them, he gives you a little history and background and explanation as to who did it, where it came from, what the context was around writing it, and so on and so forth, which is really incredible. So if you want kind of a deep dive into what Christians have believed over the course of 2,000 years and the battles that they fought against heretics, you've got to pick this up, okay? It'll be cool looking at it from like a church history perspective, but it will also help you refine your own theology and get you thinking less like a modern person and more like our forefathers in the faith, okay? One of the things that I like to do is actually use this book devotionally. Once I've spent some time in prayer and do my Bible reading, then I'll open up to a creed or a confession or a catechism that I'm working through. And like I said earlier, all of them include scripture annotation, right? And so you know where in the Bible exactly they're getting this doctrine from. So what I'll do is I'll read it. I'll read that little paragraph, and then I'll go to the verses that they cite. I'll look up those verses and I'll see if I disagree, see if I agree or disagree with their interpretation of those verses, which is a super useful exercise that will, again, just strengthen your faith and help you grow, as Peter says, in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. Anyway, pick it up. Creeds, Confessions, and Catechisms, 5 stars. Changed my life, that little book there. So go pick it up. Highly recommend it. This has been the PodCatechist. My name is Baylor Griffin. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week.